Good afternoon, everyone. I'd just like to welcome you all to today's webinar, which is Sustainability and Packaging. It's the second in a series. Today, we're talking about packaging hero or villain in a circular economy. It's another of our straight from the horse's mouth webinars, and in just 30 minutes, we'll talk you through packaging, circular economy. Our guest today is Helen Lewis from Helen Lewis Research, and she will talk about packaging in general in the circular economy. We'll share a few case studies, and then I'll talk a little bit about some tools that can be used. Now I'd like to hand over to Helen. Welcome, Helen. Helen has been with us last time, about 4 weeks ago, and talked about the business case of packaging sustainability. And today we'll hear about circular economy. Helen, over to you.
Thanks, Barbara. Hello, everybody. It's nice to be here again for another webinar and great to see so many people online. As Barbara mentioned, I'm going to talk about the principles or some principles for a circular economy for packaging and use some examples to illustrate. So you've probably heard a lot about the circular economy and wondered what it means for packaging, or wondered how it's different to recycling, clean production, closing loops, and so on. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation defines a circular economy as one based on the principles of designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and materials in use, and regenerating natural systems. So it is more than recycling, and a circular economy isn't quite the same as sustainability. In my view, the two terms go side by side, or the concepts go hand in hand rather than replacing one another. Circular economy principles tend to focus on the economy, whereas sustainability considers the triple bottom line: people, profits, and planet. Sustainability goals also vary widely depending on who's proposing them and what the purpose is. Think about the Sustainable Development Goals, for example, and how these are being adapted by many companies and government agencies for different purposes. A circular economy has narrower goals: better use of resources, less waste, less leakage into the economy and so on, into the environment and so on. It's a powerful idea because it is relatively focused and because the economic language does appeal to a broader range of stakeholders in government and industry. It links to many of the SDGs, but primarily goals 11 and 12. There are many ways of describing the circular economy, and you've probably seen quite a few of them already. I like this one. To become circular, firms need to implement new ways of doing business, to narrow or use less, to slow, use longer, close, use again, and regenerate, make clean. So when you look at these principles, it's pretty clear that we're not just talking about recycling at end of life. There are some fundamental ideas in here which are quite useful. I'm going to just briefly go through some of the packaging examples that might illustrate those principles. So first, narrowing. One narrowing strategy is to eliminate unnecessary components. As most of you would know, the trend to lighter weight and more efficient packaging has been underway for decades, primarily driven by companies trying to reduce costs, improve efficiency. One of the most interesting books I read was by Charles Fishman on the history of Walmart, and he uses an anecdote on this type of packaging just to illustrate their approach. And I'll just quote briefly. Starting in the early 1990s, a change swept through a line of products that most Americans use every day. Until then, nearly every brand and style of deodorant came in a paperboard box. In the early 1990s, Walmart, among others, decided the paperboard box was a waste. It added nothing to the deodorant experience. The product already came in a can or a plastic container that was at least as tough as the box, if not tougher. The box took up shelf space. It wasted cardboard. Shipping wasted fuel. The box cost money. With the kind of quiet but irresistible force that Walmart can apply, the retailer asked deodorant makers to eliminate the box. Deodorant no longer comes in a secondary box, and I think all packaging should be reviewed through a similar lens. So here's another one that I like. In 2008, Bunnings engaged Net Balance, a consulting group, to audit their product packaging and to look for inefficiencies or over packaging in particular. And it found many examples. And as you know, many of the products in a hardware store don't need a lot of protection. And there's an opportunity to eliminate or reduce. So the audit resulted in many changes. This is just one. These wrenches used to be individually packed in plastic film and then unitized in a PVC bag. The new packaging has minimal packaging, just a product cable to hold the wrenches together and a swing tag. Another one that I've used before because it's pretty powerful, changes to SIM card packaging have saved around 50 tonnes of cardboard a year for Optus. Previously, the SIM card included welcome and instructional information, but most customers have the card activated and inserted into their phones in store, so they didn't need all that information. And according to Optus's sustainability report, the new SIM packaging has now been rolled out to all the Optus stores and other retailers with great results. And as you can see from that photo, for 50 SIM cards, the weight of the product and packaging has gone down from 1.8 kilos to a quarter of a kilo. Now, reducing food waste is a big issue for the packaging industry and the customers that they serve. It's a very important objective. And if we take a broader systems perspective, i.e. not just the packaging, but the product system it supports, it fits here under the category of narrowing, in this case, reducing product waste. This was the winner of the World Star Save Food Packaging Award in 2018 for Sealed Air New Zealand for the packaging that they produced for Fresher, which extends the shelf life of fresh avocado to 90 days and reduces a lot of waste. The next principle is to slow the flow, to use packaging for longer. Reusable packaging can extend the life of packaging beyond a single use. There are many examples that you'd be aware of, including things like the CHEP fresh produce crates. An LCA that was done for CHEP a few years ago now that compared it with corrugated packaging concluded that the crate generated 70% less greenhouse gas emissions, 95% less solid waste, and used 85% less water. Reusable options for consumer packaging are more difficult in many ways to implement, but we are starting to see some innovation, and this is one. Beginning in mid-2021, Woolworths shoppers are going to have access to home delivery through TerraCycle's reusable packaging solution called Loop. And according to Woolworths, it will allow customers to consume a variety of commonly used products such as washing detergent, shampoo, juice and ice cream in customised brand-specific durable packaging delivered in a specially designed shipping tote, which is shown there on the left of that photo. After use, the packaging will be collected or can be dropped back in store where it will be cleaned, refilled and reused. So close or use again, this is a pretty familiar principle. It's not new, and it's a very important strategy to close the loop is to use recycled material back again into packaging. CocaCola Amatil has converted all of its single-serve PET bottles to 100% post-consumer, and by converting all of these SKUs to 100% rPET, 7 out of every 10 bottles they sell in Australia made from recycled post-consumer resin. And while other companies around the world have used 100% PET in water bottles, for example, CCA is the first to achieve this for carbonated drinks, sensitive warm-filled bottles and aseptic dairy bottles, which is why it won a 2020 Peter Award. Another one, Wellman Packaging, this lovely picture of Simon. Wellman Packaging has developed an innovative squeezy sauce bottle with 90% food-grade recycled polyethylene and is planning to get to 100%. Believed to be a first in ANZ markets, the innovation comes after 2 years of intensive work by the company in partnership with its supply chain partners to develop the processes and polymer technologies. So it's been a long process and very well done. Craig Wellman, thank you. Regenerate, make clean. The fourth principle is to regenerate or make clean. Safe or regenerative packaging is designed to minimise health and safety risks to humans and ecosystems throughout the life cycle. Timber, fibre-based packaging and biopolymers from agricultural products can impact on biodiversity and the sustainability of natural systems. The procurement of renewable materials needs to minimise any potential impacts. For example, by using materials from sustainably managed forests. The Forest Stewardship Council certifies materials according to ecological stewardship criteria. And Tetra Pak is one of the companies that sources all of their fibre from forests certified to FSC standards and other controlled sources. Another regenerative opportunity is to remove any potentially toxic or polluting components. When Kathmandu recognised that metallic inks from swing tags could release hazardous components or hazardous emissions during production and printing, it replaced the inks. The inner white pieces of the tags were printed with a silver metallic ink until it made the change. And that might look like a pretty insignificant item, but Kathmandu produce around 4 million swing tags per season and 2.5 seasons a year. So it's a lot of product. But of course, a circular economy doesn't really make sense at a product or packaging level. It's a characteristic of the total system. It involves redesign of product packaging systems, business operations that support circularity, new relationships and collaborations along the value chain, and broader interactions with consumers, regulators, and so on. So, for example, reusable packaging is only going to work if it's designed appropriately, doesn't compromise the product, supported by marketing, there's a return system in place, if customers play their part, and so on. So that involves quite a bit of change. So while the principles for a circular economy are helpful, we also need to think about the system-wide changes that are required for circularity. Thank you very much. With that, I'll hand back to Barbara.
Thank you very much, Helen. Those were really, really great examples. We do have one question for you. Has CCA shared their technology publicly for RPET?
I don't believe so, but I'm not entirely sure. I'm not sure whether anyone from CCA is online. They can probably tell us.
See if they respond. In the meantime, Oliver is asking, hi Helen, do you think the origin of recycled content is an important aspect for sustainability in the circular economy? E.g., how important is it that CCA or Wellman use recycled material from the environment where manufacturing takes place?
I think it's critical that we put recycled content back into packaging, absolutely. It's the only way that we're going to achieve a circular economy. Certainly one of the big challenges we're trying to address in Australia with the recycled content targets. We've just increased the target from 35% to 50%. So we're trying to drive the industry to make the effort, the sort of work that CCA and Wellman have done. I think we need to see a lot of that sort of innovation and partnership to try and get more material back into packaging.
Trevor is wondering, given the end of life pathway for all plastic into the food chain, should fossil-based products be banned by now?
I think it's a bit too early to ban them. I think there's definitely a transition that's occurring and we will see more and more going to sort of biopolymers. I think they are probably the future. Well, they're definitely a big part of the future. And I think at a certain point, we're nowhere near that point, but I think we definitely see that transition. But we do need to make sure that biopolymers can be recovered as well, that it's not an end in itself. We need to make sure it can also close the loop.
So 2 more for you right now, Helen. One is, do you know if there are any restrictions with using recycled materials in primary packaging in the pharmaceutical industry?
Yes, that one comes up a lot. I mean, I think it is a challenging area because it has to undergo more testing to go into pharmaceuticals. So I think it is a challenging area. I don't know what the absolute answer is, but APCO, the Packaging Covenant organisation, is going to produce a detailed design guide for recycled content later in this year, hopefully, which will address things like pharmaceutical applications. The Sustainable Packaging Coalition in the US has also published a very detailed guide, which will be worth looking at to see if they address the pharmaceutical issue.
I did say I'd read one more. So do you think it's the responsibility of the manufacturer, such as CCA, to encourage customers or users to recycle their products at the end of life to ensure a circular economy, like participate in a container deposit scheme?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that companies should do, because we know that even when something's recyclable, it's not recycled until someone's actually either taken it to a CDS point or put it in their curbside bin. So I think we've got a huge challenge, because a lot of recyclable material like PET, like corrugated cardboard, like glass, ends up in rubbish bins. So I think anything that a brand or a retailer can do to encourage that is to be commended and encouraged.
I think it takes a team. It takes the combination of the manufacturers as well as the consumers to really do it all together.
That's exactly right. I guess that's what I was getting at with that last slide, that this is a system-wide change, that it needs all of those elements to be truly circular.
I will now briefly talk about tools and approaches. And after that, we hopefully have a bit more time to get back to the chat and to some questions. My question to you is, what is the big problem here if we want to drive sustainability? Maybe a couple of answers in the chat real quick. It's the meat in the pack, exactly. And that's what we want to look at. It's the whole system. We can't really just look at the packaging. We need a systems approach, because in this case, the packaging actually reduces CO2 emissions, because having the plastic, having the steaks shrink wrapped really reduces waste significantly. And I was going to use a cucumber example, but I've used it so often. The shrink wrap of a cucumber also extends the life cycle dramatically. That reduces not so much the waste at home, but already waste in the supermarket and along the supply chain. So packaging really is not always a bad thing. It needs a systems view, as also Helen has just said. And there are tools. So newsflash, in March, there was an article saying that a life cycle approach is required. Who would have thought that in the UK, the government's plastics policy could triple UK packaging emissions? It's actually not quite as new as we thought, because Coca-Cola have been using that approach since 1969. There were ISO standards for life cycle assessment since 1996. In New Zealand, we've had the Life Cycle Association since 2009. And Helen, I believe you were involved in setting up the Australian LCI Society well before we did it in New Zealand, so early 2000s. So it's not so new. So what is this life cycle assessment, life cycle approach? It's really looking at everything from resource extraction, manufacturing, taking transport into account, also all the waste that it can occur in transport. Then the use phase, how long are we going to use things? End of life, which really shouldn't be end of life, but recycling, going back into our resource flow. It really is life cycle thinking, and life cycle assessment simply is a tool to quantify the impacts on a number of issues along that life cycle. So that is one really good tool to use if you want to take that systems holistic view. Kraft have done it for a long time. They looked at moving from a rigid container to flexible packaging, which resulted in less primary energy, less plastic, higher yield, which means less food waste, fewer emissions from transport. So all around the life cycle, it had huge advantages, but they only could identify by doing a full life cycle assessment. Taking a life cycle assessment, if you want to communicate it into an environmental product declaration, is the next step. Because an environmental product declaration, a lot of people might have heard about them from the building sector, but they are also done for packaging materials. It means there is a full LCA study, but there are also agreed rules for comparable LCA studies, and they're third-party independently verified. So they're a really good source of solid information and data on packaging. We talked about recycling before. an issue could be that we are actually downcycling instead of recycling or even upcycling. If we look at the good old can, aluminium can, there are two different grades of aluminium used. And if we recycle this as one, we're losing the quality of the higher grade aluminium. And that is where cradle-to-cradle thinking really comes in at the design stage. It's too late if we apply those tools at the end just to identify what is the best end-of-life or recycling option. We really need to apply this cradle-to-cradle thinking right at the beginning. So we need to design for recycling. To identify, is it recyclable? Can it logistically be recycled? Or is it just possibly also too small? And to quantify this recyclability, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that many of you will have heard of, which is sort of the front organization for circular economy globally, they came up with a circularity indicator. So looking at some of those aspects that I've mentioned before, is there virgin feedstock going in? Is there recycled feedstock coming in? Can it be recycled? Can it be collected? Out of all these indicators, we can calculate a circularity indicator, which will show us on a scale of 0 to 1, if a product or a material, packaging material, is fully circular, or if it is fully linear. And the components are, is there recycled content in there? Are there reused components? Is it really recyclable, or is it even reusable? As those crates from CHEP that Helen has shown before. So that's another really good tool to determine how circular is my packaging. I've mentioned briefly cradle to cradle, and that is not only a certification, but can also help with the design. Because you think right at the beginning, do all my materials fall into a technical cycle or into a biological cycle? And mixing them means it is really hard to reuse the materials at the end of life. So cradle to cradle thinks about a biological cycle of materials and a technical cycle. And the idea really is that there is no end of life, that we keep those materials in the loop and don't lose quality of those materials. That is where the upcycling rather than downcycling, where we lose quality, comes in. Cradle to cradle is also a certification. So OI Glass have, for example, gone through that process. And you can see here a scorecard which looks at material health, so toxicity is included, but also reutilization. What is the potential to reuse the materials? Are they using renewable energy, have carbon management, is there water stewardship plan in place, but also social fairness. So it almost is like a sustainability assessment. And the overall certification level in this case is bronze, because that is the lowest of the scores. So cradle to cradle is one tool to help in the design process, but then also later to communicate the results. Because it's quite easy to conflate a turtle with a polar bear. What is more important, plastic in the ocean or carbon emissions? It can be really tricky to make a decision what tools to use because there's so many topics. There's carbon, circular economy, toxicity, energy use, waste, water use, recyclability. And there are a number of different tools like life cycle assessment, what I've started to talk about at the beginning, environmental product declarations, cradle to cradle, just a carbon footprint, or the indicator. Now, before I fill this table, I wanted to hear if you have used any of those tools. So I'll just launch a quick poll. So quite a few have used life cycle assessment. Most of you haven't used anything, so this could be quite a handy way to identify a path forward. Or not sure. Quite a few have used LCA, that's really encouraging. Some have cradle-to-cradle certified products. That's very cool. If you would share in the chat who you are, that would be great to hear. Some have used the material circularity indicator and some have done a certified carbon footprint. But the question is also, why do you do it? What tools to use depends very much on what you want to achieve. Do you want to just inform your design and measure what you need to do? Do you want a more holistic assessment? Or do you simply want to communicate what you have already done? And depending on that, you might choose a different tool. So life cycle assessment will certainly help you to measure quite a few of those indicators. Your carbon footprint, toxicity, energy use, waste, water use, and gives you solid data. Going a step further, turning that into an EPD, you can communicate it easily, but you can also add other indicators and you can add qualitative information around your approach to circular economy. Cradle to cradle is a more holistic assessment. It doesn't provide the data in the communication, but it does provide that independent third-party verification as well of how well you perform. Your carbon footprint, well, it doesn't need much explanation. It just does carbon, but nothing more. And the material circularity indicator helps communicating circular economy and obviously the recyclability. So that can be a bit of an overview depending on what you'd like to achieve, what tools you can use. I will leave it at that and we'll see if there are any other questions that we can answer. Does flexible packaging get recycled less than rigid packaging? I think it's fair to say at the moment, yes, and definitely in this part of the world, yes. I think there is an increase coming, but at the moment, flexible packaging is less recycled. Helen, would you have a different view? Or?
Yeah, absolutely agree. In Australia, and I presume in New Zealand, it's not collected through curbside. We do have drop-off systems through RedCycle. The biggest limitation is finding end markets for the material because of the complexity of the material and contamination and so on. But it is coming. It will come.
Yeah. Kaya wants to know, how far do you think product stewardship can contribute to the end of life issues with packaging?
I think it's very important. I think we've got some product stewardship schemes in place. You know, we've got the packaging covenant, we've got the RedCycle scheme, which is funded by industry, paint back, recycle paint tins and so on. But yeah, I think there's definitely scope to do more, particularly for problematic materials that don't have a current end of life solution.
APCO is equivalent with other countries' legislation, isn't it? As packaging material supplier, they should moderate the standard together so it's easier to comply. What do you think? I guess generally having international agreements on, I can only speak on how to measure and how to communicate. We are achieving that through using tools like Cradle to Cradle, which is global, life cycle assessment standards are global. So on the measurement and communicate side, certainly we do have international agreement. And I think standards will always have to be to some degree country specific because of the different opportunities we have in different regions for recycling. Is packaging the actual problem or the type of product it's being used for?
I guess sometimes it's the product if it's an unnecessary product, but I guess the point you're making is that the packaging is there to serve a purpose, and that's the message that we try to get out, that packaging isn't there just because people are being obstinate and wanting to put materials into the environment. It serves a purpose. We just need to make sure that, yes, A, the product is serving a useful purpose, and B, the packaging is designed to be as circular and as minimal as possible without compromising the product, which is the purpose of it being there in the first place.
Thank you very much, Helen. And I think we've had that point right at the beginning as well, that we need to look at the system. So with that thought, thanks again, Helen, for joining us for another webinar.
Very welcome.
Thanks for all your questions. And we will go through them and we'll answer the ones that we can answer and we'll get back to you. Before I let you go, we'd love your feedback. So it would be great to hear what we could do better, what other topics you'd like to hear, and yeah, what other topics you're interested in, because we will run more webinars. We have a few more to come, one on scope 3, carbon reporting. We'll actually have one dedicated to the material circularity indicator with Jim, who's the one who developed the methodology. So that's next in a few weeks' time in June. So tune in back for that and get in touch. Thanks again for dialing in. Thank you, Helen, to be our guest again, and we'll see you all soon.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.